We begin chapter 5 and find ourselves at a royal banquet in the palace. King, queen, and courtiers shamelessly celebrate their power, oblivious that their kingdom is about to come to an end. Once more, a king receives an alarming omen that requires interpretation. Belshazzar, who now rules over Babylon, sees fingers of a human hand appear suddenly and begin writing on the wall. Now, understandably, Belshazzar freaks out. His face turns pale, his knees knock together in fear, and his sages attempt to interpret the bizarre omen fail. They're ineffective. But finally, a hero, the now old and forgotten advisor, arrives. Now, Belshazzar had no clue who Daniel was, who by now is in his 80s. Verses 10 and 11 tell us that it's the queen who informs Belshazzar of Daniel and all that he did for Nebuchadnezzar. Now, the word queen in this context does not imply Belshazzar's wife, but rather something like the queen mother, a significant political figure in an ancient court. Now, her identity is uncertain, but whoever she is, she had the knowledge of Nebuchadnezzar's rule and Daniel's position of leadership. Daniel comes in, is able to interpret the omen, and is rewarded. The omen is provoked by an act of idolatrous sacrilege in a context of bacchanalian overindulgence. Now, Daniel is able to interpret the writing on the wall because God's Spirit is in him. And the story closes with Daniel's word being confirmed by events that take place that very night. Now, in contrast to chapters 2 and 4, in this story, there is no acknowledgement of God by Belshazzar. And that's likely the reason Belshazzar suffered the fate that he did. We don't learn much about Belshazzar. We know that the last actual Chaldean king was Nabonidus, and he entrusted the kingship in 539 BC to his son Belshazzar during his 10-year absence from Babylon. Now, there's an interesting correlation between Nebuchadnezzar and his heir Belshazzar with that of Antiochus III and his son Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Antiochus III was very friendly toward the Jewish people. As a matter of fact, Josephus writes about his friendship toward the Jewish people and his respect of their religion. His son Antiochus IV, however, was the one who led the great persecution against the Jews in the 2nd century BC. He's the one responsible for desecrating the temple. You compare that to Nebuchadnezzar, where Nebuchadnezzar learned to respect the Jewish religion, befriended Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But his heir Belshazzar showed contempt for the holy items of the temple and misused them for his own sacrilegious purposes. And as a result, he was condemned. The historical turning point from Chaldean rule to Median rule is a result of the Chaldeans' failure to honor the God of the Jewish exiles. Worldly power is real, but it is subservient to the will of God. Arrogance, blasphemy, and the mistreating of God's people will cause God to act with vengeance. Now, God will always give strength and power to His people, which is good news for you and me as Christ followers today. Though we may be mistreated, persecuted around the world, pressured to conform to worldly standards and compromise our faith convictions, we will always be given strength to endure trials, and God at the end of the day will show vengeance on our behalf against evil. We just need to hold on to hope and faith in our Lord. Exegetical notes. Verse 2 says that Belshazzar gave orders to bring in the gold and silver goblets from Jerusalem. We are not told why Belshazzar sent for these particular vessels. Perhaps they are assumed to be the most valuable he possessed. Theologically, the Old Testament would reckon they certainly were. These vessels, which are sacred to the one who hates idolatry, are used for libations to idols, thus making the offense immense. Verse 5 states that Belshazzar saw the fingers of a human hand. Now, there's no indication that only Belshazzar saw the fingers writing on the wall, but there is an indication something actually did happen, and it was not just that the king was drunk. There is nothing humorous about the description of Belshazzar's reaction. He is terrified. His worship of lifeless gods provokes the manifestation of the living God in the form of a living hand, that hand which wrote at Sinai. Verse 17 records Daniel's response to Belshazzar's offer. He states, "You may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else." Why does Daniel go through the motions of refusing rewards that he has accepted before and will accept later? Daniel's initial words are confrontational. Thus, it is likely he is sidestepping any pressure to modify the omen's message, pressure that derives from the assumption that financial considerations determine the content of a prophet's message. Verse 25 records the message on the wall. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. Literally, counted at a mina a shekel and halves. Each word has several possible meanings. Like a dream, the omen has a surface meaning and a more allegorical one. Daniel's interpretation hints at three moments in God's dealings with Belshazzar as king: the past when he appointed him, the present when he is evaluating him, and the coming moment when he breaks off his dynasty because of its failure.